Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organizations. Each and every episode, we sit down with experts from various fields from around the world, just like you're grabbing a coffee with them, to dive into real practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So go grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you speak with confidence? How do you speak with influence when every part of you wants to hide, stay quiet, or blend in? Maybe you're like me, you've been at a network meeting and the former extrovert in you wants to walk around greeting people, exchange business cards, but for some reason the introvert's coming out and you find yourself over in a corner. Well, today we're going to jump into how do we handle situations like this? Because let's face it, a lot of leaders, we know our business, we know our stuff, but sometimes we struggle to project our presence. And so they speak, but our words maybe don't quite land. Sometimes our message gets lost. But what if we could change that? So today we're going to unlock the science and the secrets of charisma, influence, and all the powerful nonverbal communication with a guest who has trained CEOs, public figures, performers for more than 2 decades. I am beyond humbled and honored to have him on the podcast. He's an executive coach, organizational psychologist, body language experts, helped thousands. So it's just a complete honor to have Richard Reid on the podcast. Welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you. And thank you for such a tremendous introduction as well. I hope I live up to the billing.
Well, I love it. I have loved going through your website, reading everything that you've put out, and it's been a giant help to me. I cannot wait for this conversation for our listeners. So I was just honored. Before we jump into that, why don't you just share with us a little bit more of your story, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to this place?
Okay, so it's a bit of a winding story, really. So I'm originally from the UK. I now live in South Africa. But I originally started out working in IT and I absolutely hated it. And the only bit of it I enjoyed was translating for people what the techies were talking about. So I took a year out, went traveling around the world, and strangely enough, I ended up sharing a tent in Argentina with a psychiatrist from Wales and told him my story. And he said, "Have you ever thought about being a psychotherapist?" So when I got back from Patagonia, I read up on it. I trained as a psychotherapist, and then transitioned from being an IT consultant to working with high profile business people in central London. And a lot of the work that I was doing with them, they saw how that was really transferable to their businesses. So I then sort of became a coach, an organizational consultant, and it really sort of snowballed from there. And a lot of the kind of skills that I was seeing, the challenges that people were having were around communication, confidence, and really being their authentic selves and showing that to the world. And so I thought, why don't we package this as charisma? And it's one of those things that people either really sort of get and buy into or they absolutely hate it. But it certainly makes it memorable and it always provides a talking point.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. I love this. I guess to kind of kick off, you've been on different continents. You've been all over the globe. Does the nonverbal presence in our communication, does it change from different continents? I understand the language changes and those kind of things, but I'm so curious, do some of those nonverbals change across continents, or do those kind of things stay, across the plane in all humans?
Yeah, really good question. I think by and large, the symbols and the signs are the same from in each country and every culture. There are some differences though. So inevitably, some cultures they use their hands a lot more. Some cultures, eye contact is more appropriate than others. And it's also to do with sort of seniority, status, how familiar you are with people. But by and large, a lot of the things remain the same consistently across the board. It's really to do with how safe we make other people feel. And we think about safety as being about physical safety, but it's what kind of reassurance do we give people? What reassurance do we give them that actually we're rooting for them, that they can put their confidence in us with projects, with their money, whatever it might be. It all boils down to safety, and that's fundamental for every human being.
Wow, I love that. So I love the name of your book, Charisma. I'm drawn to that, and so I'm just so curious from your point of view. Is this something that's learned? Is it something we're born with? Are some people just they're just blessed with more doses of it? Would love for you to dive into that.
Yeah. I personally think it's a bit of both. So inevitably, there are some people who are naturally born with more charisma than other
Mm,
people. But I'm a firm believer, and I think that the results support that. In that, wherever you are starting, it's a continuum, and there is absolutely immense possibility to move further along that continuum by learning the basic skills. And it's not about learning them in the right way. It's about how you integrate them into who you naturally are. It's not about making everybody the same, because we're not,
mm.
and that's hard to sustain. And people pick up on that. It's not authentic. So it's how do you absorb those within the person that you are and have the confidence to show the person that you are. So we're really big on celebrating people's uniqueness and getting people more comfortable with that, because a lot of the time we hide in the crowd. We only show people the parts of ourselves that we think are acceptable and that they're going to validate. So it's really gradually getting people to experiment with that and actually seeing that for the most part people accept who we are. And quirkiness actually can also be a form of charisma. It makes you memorable.
Mm.
It creates a brand.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Do you think when it comes to quirkiness, when it comes to kind of celebrating some of those, interesting quirks about us. Do you think over time in 2025, it's more acceptable, to kind of let loose with some of those quirks than say, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for better and for worse, we're a more individualistic society now, aren't we? So we celebrate uniqueness. It's not as much about conformity as it used to be. And I think with exceptions, I think we're also more willing to show vulnerability in a way that we weren't many years ago.
Oh, wow.
Albeit, I have to say, working within the leadership sphere, there are still a sort of a hardcore group of people who think that actually you have to be perfect, you have to know everything. And that's a heavy weight to bear, but also it's not realistic. It doesn't
Whew.
help you to connect with people because it's not most people's experience of the world. So I definitely think that times are changing and things are moving on.
So, I mean, you help leaders with their presence so often. I find myself in quite a few rooms with executive leaders. And so it's just fascinating, watching different people enter a room, how they're trying to figure things out. What are some of the biggest
Yeah.
myths around executive presence, for leaders? What are some of the things that we just sometimes convince ourselves about a presence?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people think that it starts with outward behaviours. If you put your hands in a
Mm.
certain way, if you use your voice in a certain way, that's going to give you presence, and it can. But it's not authentic. It's not sustainable. And so where you need to start with this is to become more aware and develop the ability to manage your internal world, because your internal world then gives you the flexibility to
Wow.
bring to bear skills in the most appropriate way. You can have all the skills in the world, and I can teach you those, but actually, if you don't know how to use them in a deliberate and purposeful way, they're going to be very hit and miss. So that's a big part of what I look at. So this is building your emotional intelligence. What am I feeling? How is that affecting me? How might that be coming across to other people? What's going on for other people? What do they need from me? And to be able to do that, you've got to be able to manage your emotions so you've got that spare capacity. If you are overwhelmed by your emotions, even with the best of intentions, you're going to be less aware and less inclined to think about what's going on for other people. So that's the
Wow.
first thing. And I think that's fundamental. And people want to fast track that. They want to go to all the fancy stuff, but you've got to do the hard miles. You've got to do that bit to get it right.
Wow.
So that's the first thing I would say.
Wow. That's incredible. So your internal world, if your internal world's in shambles, your external world is probably not far behind.
Absolutely. And you think about how often we act on impulse and we do things in autopilot. If I tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Why did you just say that in that way? Why did you just do that?" A lot of the time we don't know why, because we're operating on autopilot. And that's because we're not using our emotional intelligence and developing our emotional intelligence. So really, it's always a work in progress. But with charisma, we want to be moving towards being more deliberate in as many different things as we can be. And when we are deliberate, when we are purposeful, that creates presence. We look like somebody who knows where they're going. We're not just walking across the room in a random way. We're doing it because there's a drive behind it. So this plays into everything: how we move, how we use our voice, what we say, when we say it, how we say it, all of these things. And the other thing I would say about leadership is that a lot of people think it's about being the cleverest person in the room. They think it's about being the person who's holding court and saying everything. Sometimes it's about knowing when to hold back, when to bring other people into the conversation, when to acknowledge other people's contributions and opinions. And that galvanizes teams. When you don't have that, you create an echo chamber. You make people feel unsafe. And you also create a huge weight for your own shoulders.
Wow. Powerful. So, not to throw you and I under the bus, but we're both got a little bit of the gray hair category.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yes. So we've lived a little bit of life. Do you, from your professional standpoint with leading leaders, for a few decades, do you think that the EQ quotient in the younger generations is lower, higher than us older generations? And what have these devices, brought into that? I know I didn't include this question in the questions, but it just popped into my head, to talk to an expert about it. Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting question. I think it's a real mixed bag. I think in some respects, younger generations are more in tune with their emotions. I don't think they're necessarily better equipped to manage those emotions, but they, for the most part, they are, and they're more willing to speak about it. But I do worry about the fact that people throw labels at everything. There's a risk with labeling things that actually you don't own it and you don't work with it. It's kind of hands up. This is who I am. Certainly any kind of mental health issue, we for the most part, we can work on them. We have to take some degree of ownership of it. So I think there is, in some parts, more emotional intelligence. But I guess the bit that concerns me is that, with technology, everything's speeding up more and more, that actually even when we have the ability to be more emotionally intelligent, when we're in the throes of all of that, that actually we don't access that. In other words, we're in what's called system one of the brain. System one is all about impulse. And think about how life is increasingly set up. It's I want something, I have it straight away. I think something, I say it straight away because it's my truth. And actually, even if some of those things need to be said, do they need to be said right then? Do they need to be said in that way? How's that going to land with somebody else?
Yes.
Yeah. So impulse is always the thing that throws people and causes breaks in relationships. Wow. So recognizing that, managing that is really important. And some of that is sometimes just about being silent in the conversation. Even if you've got things you really want to say, holding back, letting the other person speak creates a very different dynamic in the conversation. You can still say what you want to say, but you are more likely to land it in a way which they're receptive to, because you can adapt it to the things that are meaningful for them.
Wow. It is interesting. I have children in the youngest generation, Gen Alpha or Gen Y, I've heard it referred to, then in Gen Z. Yeah. And so, just watching the change, me and Gen X, yeah, we kind of went crazy when Facebook came out and we started sharing photos about everything.
Those are the days, yeah.
Yes. But now with Gen Z, it's fascinating how easily it is to just go online and rant and yell and, the impulse stuff that you talked about. Yeah. It's so fascinating to see what's going to happen to that generation in 20 years. Yeah. With all of this information overload, with the ability to say what they want all the time to a broad audience. It's an incredible time.
It is, and there are massive pros and cons. I think one of the things that concerns me most is that when people aren't in control of their impulse, their impulses, they don't develop the ability to sit with their own discomfort, and that's really important in terms of building resilience. That you have to be able to tolerate discomfort to some degree, because life is going to throw curveballs at you, and if every time you feel something you act on it, you never learn to manage that. And it's really important, because you think about, any time in life, but particularly as you get older, how many things that potentially happen to you that are immediately outside of your control. In other words, there's a waiting game. So I'm waiting for results from the doctor. I'm waiting to see whether I'm going to keep my job. that all these kinds of things involve tolerance of uncomfortable feelings. So that's my big concern.
Wow, I love it. Okay, so I Speak with People has a community group on Facebook called the Speakers Group, and we have 1,200 leaders from around the world, and we have a
Really?
regular leader who comments, and I'm hearing their voice by saying, "But I'm insanely introverted. I'll never be able to walk into a room with charisma. It's too much. It's too many people." What do you say to that far? I mean, they're on one end of
Yeah.
the thing, but I'm just curious what your advice and thought is to them, because they want to be able to have the ability to walk in and talk and meet new people and have some charisma and presence, but would love to start there.
Absolutely, and those kind of people are my sweet spot because I am one of those people. So when I go
Love it.
into a networking room, I need purpose. I need to know why I'm there. And wandering into a room where you don't know where it's going to go, naturally, that's where I struggle. So one of the things that I always encourage people to do is when you're going into situations, first of all, don't compare yourself to extroverts. Okay, you have your own special skills, and if you compare yourself to those people, you're always going to feel otherworldly. You're always going to feel vulnerable and feel like you're failing in some way. But actually, being an introvert is one of your superpowers, and actually, how you can use it to your advantage is to make one person feel like they are the focal point of your world for the 5 or 10 minutes that you speak to them. So it's not about entertaining people. It's not about talking at people. It's about demonstrating curiosity, creating and facilitating an environment where somebody else can talk about themselves. And almost inevitably, as you do that, they will open up topics for you that feel comfortable for you to explore with them. But the very fact that you are creating an environment where they can express themselves, and you're hopefully doing that in an authentic way, that's unusual. Most people don't do that. So straight away, that makes you more memorable. And if you're being attentive, if you're asking questions that are really trying to understand the emotions that sit beneath positions, it's not collecting information. This is about connecting with them at a deeper level. What you're doing is you're creating something fresh. When we're performing, when we're talking at people, it's almost scripted. We know how that's going to play out. We come
Yeah.
away, we have a polite conversation. Nobody, we exchange cards. Nobody contacts each other. But actually, when I see you as an individual and you see me as an individual, that's memorable. I will remember you. That's promoting your brand, and you're somebody who I'm going to think about when opportunities arise.
Wow. Wow. I love that. So let's go to then, the high performers walking into a room, maybe high, in the C-suite, the
Yeah.
kind of higher level leader, they've gotten to that position. What are some of the communication habits that are holding them back from, being their true self, for being comfortable in that executive presence?
Yeah. Well, I think the classic thing is imposter syndrome, isn't it?
Mm.
So, on paper, you could be the most capable person in the world. You're absolutely the right person for the job, but you're waiting for that tap on the shoulder that says, actually, you're not up to this, are you? You shouldn't be here. And I see this all the time in the conversation that I have with people you wouldn't even imagine would have issues in this area. And it's not there all the time. It ebbs and flows depending on what's happening for them externally, but it's there nonetheless. So I think there's a few things that people need to do with that, but I think first and foremost, it is about making a habit of reminding yourself of your value. And in our calm moments, we can remember this and say, well, look, yeah, I'm good at this. I've done this. I've done the other. But actually, when we're vulnerable, when we're in those pressure moments, we forget that. And the way that we make um, uh, an alternative reaction to those kind of situations is rehearsal. So one
Mm.
of the things that I do, and one of the things I encourage my clients to do, is every day to reflect back on your day and, number one, talk about successes. But number two, talk about characteristics that you brought to situations. So have I brought effort? Have I brought determination? How have I brought value to situations
Wow.
that wouldn't have been there otherwise? So, maybe I've supported somebody else, but actually because I've been busy or because I'm a high achiever, I don't place value on that. I skim over it. So we have to make the effort to remind ourselves of these things. And it can feel a bit clunky and artificial to begin with, but the more that you do that, say 5 o'clock every night, I'm going to spend 10 minutes reflecting and writing this stuff down. It starts to ingrain. It becomes a natural habit. And as you're going through the day, because you've got to do this exercise in the evening, you start to notice these things and really connect with them in real time. And that's how you do it. It's not enough just to occasionally remind yourself of your capabilities. You've got to be doing it day to day, because as human beings, to varying degrees, we're predisposed to think negatively. So we're very good at pointing out our faults, very good at comparing ourselves to others, and seeing how we perceive that we fail. Most of us are not very good at reminding ourselves of the good stuff, and particularly high achievers, because a lot of the time it's based upon fear. Actually, it's not about what I want to achieve; it's what I want to avoid. And when I'm meeting the target, big deal, you made the target. So what? What's next? So you're not getting the value from the successes that you have, and it's those that will fuel you to bigger and better things.
Wow. Wow. Oh my goodness. You are giving us just a complete masterclass on this topic. I think of all of, as you were talking, seasons of my leadership flashed before my eyes, thinking through, okay, if I would have done this, if some of these practices, would have helped guide me, and I wouldn't have lost, so much time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, think how much time we ruminate about not being good at our jobs. And
Right.
we do have to take a balanced approach to it. But it's not about saying everything's wonderful if it's not. But most of the time we're not balanced. We've just got that inner critic. So this is about being fair to yourself in the way that you hopefully be fair to other people. Treat yourself like you treat other people.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so let's flip the script for a second. So when it comes to managers, sweet leaders, they have the responsibility of leading
Yeah.
teams. Then, what are some of the things that they can be doing to build this into their work cultures? To kind of bring this healthy part to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it starts with modeling it. I've
Mm.
worked in lots of organisations where they talk a good fight, but actually you've got people at the top doing very different things. So you've got to model the behaviours and the values that you want to see in your organisation. And I think for me, part of that is about um, how you treat yourself, because that will translate into how you treat other people. But I think
Mm.
it's also, going back to what I said before, it's also about demonstrating humility. And I'm a big advocate of what we call psychological safety. So in other words, I create an environment where people feel okay to speak up when they don't understand. People speak up when they're struggling. People speak up when they've got a different viewpoint or a new idea. And there are lots of organizations where people say it's okay to do that, but actually in reality, it's not. You get chastised, you get shouted down, people pick holes in your argument before they've fully heard it. So again, this comes back to how we conduct conversations with people as well. So even if somebody's saying something and our immediate reaction is that's not going to work or that's a terrible idea, how we relay that to them makes a big impact, not just for them, but for other people in terms of how likely they are to speak up in the future. So
Mm.
even if it's an idea that's not going to work, showing curiosity for it. Tell me more about that. What was it about that you thought might be useful here? So you can then use their ideas and the motivations behind that to really give them a better explanation of why that's not going to work in a supportive way, rather than the way which chastises them and humiliates them. So it's things like that that are really, really important. Asking other people for their opinions, speaking up when maybe we've had a difficulty or haven't understood something,
Yep.
and ideally talking about things that we've worked through that were difficulties. But sometimes it might be actually this is a challenge for me at the moment. That levels the playing field. It makes other people more likely to speak up and show their individuality.
Wow.
And as a result, you've got a more cohesive organization with not such a big gap between the C-suite and the rest of the organization, because it's genuine human experience. Everybody has challenges. Nobody knows everything, so why not own that?
Wow. Absolutely. That is powerful. My world was rocked. Maybe it was 15 years ago. I was working on an MBA, and they handed
Mm.
us Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman. And it
Yeah.
was the first time, I started reading some of this, because the organization that I worked for modeled communicate, lead out of fear, out of control, out of
Mm.
manipulation. The
Yeah.
harder we are on you, the more productive you'll be. And his research was like, no, that's not going to work. Where do you think we are now in the workforce? We've come a long way from,
Yeah.
totally fear driven.
Yeah.
Do you see progress? Where do you think we're at?
I do see progress, but I also think there's a lot of people have read that book and books like that, and they understand the book, and the risk is they get complacent and think, well, I'm emotionally intelligent. I've read the books, it's a living, breathing activity. Even somebody like me who teaches this stuff, you've got to be on top of it all the time, because
Yep.
otherwise you slip back. It's not natural human nature to be considerate, particularly when we're under pressure. It doesn't matter how nice a person you are. You focus less on the people. You get more snappy. You don't give people the time and the space they need to express themselves. So we've got to be on top of this every day. So being complacent and saying I'm emotionally intelligent is not a good place to be. It's
Yeah.
always a work in progress. So I think things are shifting. People are starting to recognise the ideas that sit behind that and why it makes sense. But I think we're always competing with human nature.
Right.
That's always going to be there. So you can't just say I've got it and that's done. It's always going to be an ongoing process. But again, holding ourselves to account, having a common attitude and set of values within an organisation means that actually we've got a North Star. If we're starting to deviate from that as an individual or as a team or an organisation, we can readjust. So it gives us something to aspire to, but
Right.
don't get complacent.
Right. So do you think, as much as for our Apple Podcast, Spotify listeners, I'm holding up my phone. If you're watching on YouTube, do you think our addictions to this device and the freedom that we fully watch? The other day, I was watching a live stream of a political news conference, and the comments were just streaming. And, it's just 50-50. 50% were positive, 50% negative. But, it's not just in the political sphere, all other places online. Civility, consideration, respect, it's hard to find sometimes. Do you think that has helped spill over into the workplace, into our everyday, or is there still some pretty good boundaries for people when it comes to treating each other with civility and consideration? Or are they starting to spill over on each other?
I think it's starting to spill over, and I so just to sort of add to the color in my background. So when I went to university, I studied ancient Greek and Latin, and I remember reading something by Plutarch, and Plutarch basically said that he was talking about the arena, going to the amphitheater and seeing things, how that affects your psyche. And it's exactly the same with this stuff, that even if you don't buy into some of the things that you see, it is having an impact upon your well-being, which has ripple effects for everything else that you do. So I think absolutely we've got to, I'm not saying we live in a gilded cage, but we do need to set boundaries around what we expose ourselves to as much as possible, because it affects us in innocuous ways. So we do have to be careful. But I think, without getting too political, I think there are lots of things in the political arena in terms of how statesmen are behaving at the moment, which is really giving out all the wrong messages. So,
Right.
again, even when you've got fundamental differences with another statesman or statesperson, there are ways and means in which you can conduct yourself. You can show respect without trying to humiliate somebody. And I think we're seeing that very explicitly on the world stage at the moment. And I think that's really concerning, the messages that gives out.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you anymore. As we kind of around the corner in the conversation, we do this a lot now, leaders. I'm on one side of the globe. You're on the other side of the globe. We're talking somehow. I still don't quite know how this magic works.
Yeah. Don't ask me.
Yesterday, I did a training for 67 software engineers, sitting in my home studio. They're all over the United States of America. Next hour, I'll interview a fantastic woman in Dubai. So all that being said, how do we then have charisma across the screen? How do we, because we're doing Zoom trainings, we got Teams trainings, how do we bring some of that across the screen?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. It is an added dimension to it for sure. I always liken it to 100 meters Olympic final race. Okay, you don't just turn up and start running. You don't, and it's the same with a Teams call. You don't just turn up and the meeting starts when people start talking. It starts before the meeting. And, in this day and age, we don't necessarily have the luxury that we would have had when we were having so many face-to-face meetings. You don't have the break moving between offices or locations.
Right.
Sometimes you only get 10 seconds, 30 seconds before you're on your next call. So I think we have to go to extra efforts to register what we're experiencing having come off one call. And even if we don't have time to bring that under control, if that's unhelpful, to register it, because if we register it, we can at least take steps to mitigate against it. So if I've been rattled by a conversation I've just had, now I've got to be ultra friendly. If I'm aware I've been rattled, I might tread a little bit more carefully. I might speak a little bit more slowly, for instance. I might deliberately move a little bit more slowly. But the important thing is I'm taking stock. So I'm allowing myself an opportunity to offset some of that emotional leakage. So that's the first thing I would say.
Mm.
And the second thing is talking about intention. So the risk is when we're having so many meetings and they're rapid fire is that we start to objectify people. It's another thing to tick off. Yeah. If I set an intention for the meeting, by that, what I mean is, how do I want the other person to feel? And
Wow.
when you determine that, that will then naturally start to inform how you use your voice, how you use your body language. And it also gives you an opportunity, if you're going off track, to again use it as a North Star to say, well, hang on, I wanted this person to feel really relaxed or really enthusiastic. This is not going the way I wanted it to. What do I need to do to get this back on track? So it gives you some guidelines and parameters for the conversation. But I think it's really important that we have this little bit of buffer time around meetings, so it doesn't become fully transactional. There is time to be a little bit more expansive. Maybe even if we can get into a meeting a little bit earlier, so we have that little bit of small talk that we're often dismissive of.
Yes.
Because that's how you put people at ease. That's how you see somebody as a human being rather than a conduit or a blocker to the things that you want to achieve.
Wow.
When I see you as a human being and you see me as a human being, we are more likely to engage in a meaningful way rather than get into sort of antagonistic conversations. So for me, those are the really important things to start with. And if you can get those foundations right, then the rest is likely to follow from there. But, so often we're too reliant upon the contents of what we want to say. Yeah, the contents is important to add substance, but actually your message is only as effective as the way in which it's received. If you don't generate the right emotions, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to be memorable. People aren't going to act on that information the way that you want them to. So those would be my top tips.
Wow. Boy, I love that. Do you find in your part of the globe, over here, we're seeing more companies having people go back to the office or trying to have them? Is that happening in your neck of the woods, or not so much?
Yeah, it is, and people are generally kicking up a fuss about it because people have got used to
Right.
integrating their personal lives with their work lives a lot more. And I think it's inevitable. I think we do miss out on things by not being physically around people, because it's not just the transactional meetings and conversations. Think about the things we pick up organically from just being around people that make us feel part of the culture. Or think about, for people like us who've been around the block a few times, it's probably not so bad. But imagine if you're a new person coming into the workplace. You don't have necessarily the understanding of how the culture works or the etiquette. And it's not just about what people formally tell you; it's how you model other people's behaviour.
Wow.
So to do that, you've got to be around people and absorb that almost through osmosis. So I think we are missing out on a lot. And I think the risk as well is that, and again, speaking as an introvert, this sort of chimes with me and maybe others who are listening to this. But as introverts, we tend to naturally want to work independently and on our own a lot of the time. And actually, too much of what you want is not good for you either. So as much as that might be playing to your sweet spot, if you're doing that all the time, you are losing the ability to interact with people. I've worked with lots of people who are going back to the workplace and saying, actually, things that used to come to me easily, I don't feel as confident doing those things because I haven't been around people as much.
Right.
So I think whoever you are, whatever your default and most comfortable way of operating is, you need to come out of that sometimes. Wow. Otherwise, it's ever decreasing circles. You see this with old people. People are retired and don't have other things going on.
Yep.
Things that before would have been matter of fact, like going to the shop, suddenly become a big deal.
Right.
Because they're out of practice and it becomes anxiety inducing because it becomes a focal point for them. So it's exactly the same with the workplace. So I think there's a balance to be struck. I think we don't necessarily need everybody to be in every day, but I think there needs to be some overlap between people.
Absolutely. Wow. I totally agree. And I see that so much with, communication coaching or training, whether I'm doing public speaking coaching or client focused coaching. So many of us, especially those of us who've lived a few years, we kind of get into this rut where we go, well, I've always done it this way. I've always done it this way.
Yeah.
Why should I change now? Because exactly what you just articulated so well that we've got to push ourselves out of those comfort zones if we're going to continue to grow. I mean, just so powerful.
Definitely. Definitely. But energy as well. You can create a degree of energy over video call, but just think about when you get a group of creative people together in one room. We're animals. We feed off energy. We tend to think we're intellectuals, but actually, first and foremost, we're sophisticated animals, and those are the kind of things that people feed off. And the collective sum of that energy can make great things happen in a way that doesn't necessarily happen when we're working in isolation, even when we then come together on these kind of calls in between times. So having a
Absolutely.
balance, I think, is really important.
Love it. So last question, when you think of communicating or speaking with someone or speaking at them, what's the big distinction that kind of crosses your mind?
So speaking at somebody, it's almost a preordained script. I know what I'm going to say, or maybe you're saying something to me, and I'm already thinking about what I want to say next, or I'm
Mm,
making assumptions about what you're saying. I'm cutting you off before you've had a chance to fully express yourself. So that's talking at somebody. When we create space for somebody, and often if we introduce a topic and let the other person expand before we intervene, we're creating something fresh. For me, that's talking with somebody. It's more unpredictable, but some amazing things come out of it, and some more memorable things come out of it. And just think about some of the conversations you may have had, or other people may have had. The ones that tend to stand out are the ones where actually, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen. But it's scary. It's scary
right.
to trust in the process. So you've got
Right.
to try and do this over a period of time and get more comfortable with it.
Oh, I love that. Before I let you go, a couple rapid fire questions. Our listeners know we're building an online communicators library, speakwithpeople.com/skills library, but it's just filled with lots of different resources and ideas. So Richard, do you have a favorite speaker? Somebody that every time you hear them communicate, they check off the boxes, fill your internal cup. You can't wait to tell people about them.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a classic, and maybe this one's come up before. Barack Obama. I think
Mm,
he's brilliant at this stuff. He brings emotion into things in appropriate ways. He's very measured in terms of his use of language, both verbal and non-verbal, and he's authoritative, but with a degree of humility about it as well.
right.
So he's accessible. So I think he ticks all the boxes. I think he's brilliant.
I love it. If you're a podcast listener, not everyone is, but if you are, is there a guilty pleasure or a development podcast that you just keep going back to and highly recommend?
So I'm a history buff, and I really like podcasts by there's an English historian called Dan Snow, and they're really interested for history, but actually, it's really interesting in terms of understanding more about human nature as well, and how we haven't really changed that much over the years, but actually we can learn a lot from the mistakes of the past to inform how we behave in the future. So I definitely recommend Dan Snow.
Well, it's funny when you were quoting, the Greek philosopher earlier. I can't remember the name.
Plutarch,
Yes.
yeah.
But yeah, human nature. I mean, it's like you would think all these years later, we still wouldn't have a mob mentality or people would gather to watch, humans rip each other apart. Nope.
We're only one step away.
I mean, it's just incredible. I love that. Okay, and then a book. You run into someone, they're about to go to a desert island. They can only bring one book. What book do you say, hey, you've got to take this one?
Well, let me have a think about that. I th- there's a book called Any Human Heart, and the name of the author escapes me. Any Human Heart, check that out. It was also made into a TV series, and what I like about it is it charts a guy's life from the year 1900 to when he dies in 1987, and he's in competition with two friends. They're all authors, and his friends are wildly more successful than him. But the point of the story is he achieves success right at the end of his life, and so for me, the message in that is that the race is only over when you decide the race is over.
Ooh,
So it's that idea of keeping going, resilience, determination. Check that out. As soon as I come off this call, I can guarantee I'll remember the author's name, but Any Human Heart.
yeah, we'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes. And the last one, probably the most important. Do you personally believe that Jon Snow should have been sent back up to the north, or should he have been the true and rightful king?
course he should have been. Of course I thought, fantastic series. I thought it peaks at 3 or 4 episodes into the final season. I think,
Yeah.
it was really disappointing how it ended up. And I just think, having Bran as the overall king, really disappointing.
Yep.
Really disappointing.
Yep.
So yeah, they should have cut their losses a few episodes earlier.
Yes, I do. I think I read, though, there is going to be a series just on Jon Snow.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I thought the new one.
We live in hope.
Yes, I thought the new one, House of Dragon, just moved so slow. I'm like,
Yeah, it takes a while to get into it, but the original series was brilliant, and everybody you were rooting for got killed.
Yeah,
every time you thought you picked your new hero, they died.
I know. I love it. Well, I had to throw that in there. For our listeners, where's the best place we can send people online to find what you do and connect with you?
Sure. So you can visit my website, which is www.richard-reid.com, Reid spelled R-E-I-D, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And again, it's Richard-Reid.
Perfect. Well, we will put all of that in the show notes, in the Facebook group, in our weekly communication guide, all the resources that we send out to leaders every week to help them become exceptional communicators. Richard, this was such an honor. I've taken pages of notes. This conversation, I know, will help our listeners. I'm just so blown away by your work, and thank you for sharing. And we'll make sure we put your book, because your book just came out, right?
Came out on the 1st of March, the Charisma Edge. Charisma Unlocked, and you can find it on Amazon.
Yes, and we'll put the link for all of that, and we'll put that in our social media as well, because it's just a phenomenal book. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Speak with People podcast. It means the world to us when you share this episode. Thanks for liking, subscribing, or following the podcast. That really does help the podcast get into more ears and into more leaders listening. Also, don't forget, we have 2 exciting resources for you. The first is go to Facebook and join the Speakers Group. This is a community designed for leaders who want to grow their communication skills. Also, go to speakwithpeople.com/skills library to access the Communication Skills Library. It is an online resource chock filled with resources that will inspire you and transform you and grow your communication skills. Thanks again for being a part of the listening community. We cannot wait for the next episode.